Hello and welcome. Today we've got David Mahoney, and today we are going to be discussing what is really going on with Israel. We're going to talk about biblical predictions and also the weather in the Middle East that ties in with the biblical predictions. Now, just before we begin, you can subscribe to my Instagram channel at nicholas.veniamin, where you can follow all my daily newsreels. David, thank you so much for joining me once again. How are you and what have you been up to?
Oh, hey, Nick. It's been a while, actually. We keep missing each other with our traveling schedules. I'm a little bit sick, but just a head cold, mate. I got one ear blocked up, which is a bit weird. I'm kind of going like this all the time to people. They think I'm trying to wind them up a bit. But I've been very well, working a lot, recording a lot, researching a lot. So I've got an interesting show lined up, which maybe your viewers know a little bit about this. But what I'm going to present today is going to be some overwhelming evidence that there's something really odd. There's this whole story with Israel and how it all ties into a very strange biblical prediction. So I'm going to kick it off with that.
Okay,
But
let's do it.
it's an odd one, right? Because I don't know if the viewers remember, but I think it was September last year, the Israelis made a really big deal about exporting from America 3 red cows. Now they call them red heifers. So they didn't say anything. It was just a bunch of weird looking guys standing around these 3 cows that were exported to Israel. Quite an innocent thing, but it made mainstream media little show, these 3 cows are exported to Israel. And they call them heifers, female cows, heifers, yeah? Now, these 3 were quite strange looking because they were completely red.
Mhm.
There was the color of the cows were red. Now, this is where it ties into this odd biblical prediction, Nick. And I'm going to get really strange about this now, because at the moment, if you talk to anybody that studies the Bible, they're talking about us being in the book of Revelation. We are in Revelation, and we're not just in Revelation, we're in tribulation. So what happens in tribulation? People say, well, there's basically a 7-year period. And this all ties into the biblical prediction, and it also ties into Israel. Now, this is where it gets strange, because the Jewish tradition does not recognize the Bible. They say it's bullshit. They say, no, we don't recognize that. Jesus was a fake prophet, false prophet. But here's where it gets in, because the Israelis are taking something that's talked about in the Bible and they're acting upon it now. So this is all about the prediction of tribulation. And here's how I'm going to say it in basic terms so people can understand it. Basically, it's about the Messiah coming back. It's about the second coming of Jesus. And in the Bible, it says that he will come back and he'll be a very popular man. Everybody will worship him, and he will come back and people will worship him as the second Jesus coming back. But what happens in year number 4 of his coming, his return, the Messiah returns, he's going to be exposed as basically the Antichrist. And then we go into this tribulation period where it's 7 years of hell on earth. And that you can imagine what that means. It means turmoil, war, devastation, a lot of deaths. And how is this all tying into these 3 cows? So in the Bible, it talks about the 3 red heifers. And what they have to do is they have to select one cow. And it has to be absolutely perfect with not a single hair on it that is not red. It needs to be unblemished and absolutely perfect. Now, then this cow is slaughtered in a very particular place. It has to be taken through a gate. And I might be wrong on the location, but it is in Israel. We're talking about Jerusalem, okay? It has to be taken through a gate in Jerusalem and slaughtered. And then the calf, the red heifer, has to be placed on a fire and burned. And then the ashes need to be removed. And then there's special priests that are chosen. And then they use the ashes from the red heifer to cleanse themselves. So they do this ritual. And then basically the ashes are then taken by the priests and they're brought to a place where they're going to rebuild a specific temple.
Okay.
And from that temple, this is where the Messiah is going to be basically either announced or he's going to come into the temple. So the weird thing about that is they have the cows already. They've already started talking about where this temple is going to be rebuilt. They know they've already said it's going to take 3 months to build this temple. So the Jews are talking about the coming of the Messiah, but who is going to be the Antichrist. And they've taken this information directly from the Bible which they don't like, they don't recognize. So it's like, you've got the Bible following Christians saying, hey, get your own material. What are you doing with those 3 cows? Why are you talking about rebuilding this temple? So there's a really strange thing going on about that. Now, it also ties in to another series of strange events, because if we go back to the attacks with the current situation in Gaza and Israel, what is going on? Why do they need all this information about Gaza? So I came across a story. There's a doctor that was working, and I'm going to show this video, Nick. It's not very long, but this is, I need to open up one page there, Nick, so bear with me. I'll talk while I get things ready. There was a doctor that was working, Middle Eastern doctor that was working in the hospitals of Gaza. And during the time of when the invasion was there, he was in the hospital. So Germany, in Berlin, there was a conference going on last week where they were giving testimony of eyewitnesses, because that Israel had been put through the human rights violation foundations. And what they're doing is they're trying to prove that there was human rights violations that happened in this part of the world. Now, this doctor, let's have a look now. An exclusive interview of the Middle East eyewitness, which is Ghassan Ab-Sitau, a British Palestinian doctor who became known for his work in Gaza. So I'm going to show you this video about what happened when he was requested to go to Germany to testify in Germany about what he saw happen in these hospitals, because Germany are complacent in covering up the human rights violations, which again all ties into this weird biblical stuff. Here, have a look at this, Nick. I'm going to share it now, because this happened last week, and again, mainstream media not talking about it.
Is Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sitta. I've just returned from Germany, where I had been prevented from entering the country for attending a conference in Germany to give evidence on the war in Gaza and my witness statement as a doctor working in its hospitals. So this morning at 10 o'clock, I landed in Berlin to attend a conference on Palestine, where I had been asked, along with many others in the UK, in the United States, and in Europe, to give my evidence of the 43 days that I had seen in the hospitals in Gaza, working in both Shifa and Al Ahli Hospital. Upon arrival, I was stopped at the passport office. I was then escorted down to the basement of the airport, where I was questioned for around 3.5 hours. At the end of 3.5 hours, I was told that I will not be allowed to enter German soil, and that this ban will last the whole of April. And not just that if I were to try to link up my Zoom or FaceTime with the conference, even if I was outside Germany, or I were to send a video of my lecture to the conference in Berlin, then that would constitute a breach of German law, and that I would endanger myself to having a fine or even up to a year of prison. I then was asked at the end to book a flight back to the UK. My passport was taken away from me, and then I only got my passport back as I was boarding the plane. As Germany is defending itself against the Nicaraguan charges that it is an accomplice to the genocidal war, as described by the International Court of Justice, this is exactly what accomplices to a crime do. They bury the evidence, and they silence or harass or intimidate the witnesses. And so, as members of a gang that has committed a heinous crime, Germany is doing its bit in that crime, which is to ensure that there is complete impunity, and so that the genocide can continue uninterrupted. So the Jewish intellectual Hannah Arendt, in the first lecture that she gave in Germany in 1958 after the Second World War, She said, we humanize what is going on in the world and in ourselves by speaking of it. And in the course of speaking of it, we learn to be human. There is so much peril before us. To speak of it in earnest, to understand the causes and the alternative is to practice our humanity. And this crackdown on free speech is a dangerous precedent, because what is happening in Gaza is a dangerous precedent. We are watching the first genocide unfold in the 21st century. And for Germany to become implicated as an accomplice in silencing the witnesses of this genocide does not bode well for the rest of the century.
Super interesting video that, Nick, no? Because again...
Very good. Why do you think Germany want to hide it? Maybe it's a silly question.
Because they're in cahoots. They're in cahoots with the Israeli government. You know, this is all something that it's been well planned in advance, Nick. The next video will show you exactly what I'm talking about. Now, again, I'm not biased towards either side. I'm not pro-Palestinian, and I'm not pro-Israeli. What I am pro is humanity, because there are atrocities going on there because of this land grab or whatever else the real intention is of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And there's so much cloudiness going on here. What is the real intention of Israel? No, they're not trying to protect themselves. The next video will explain that. Go on.
I'm pro-humanity like yourself. I don't choose a side. I'm pro-humanity, pro-peace, and pro-love. My concern is the Rothschild families who are Zionists, who are communists. We need to find where they're being disguised. And I think that they have infiltrated or they've directed the Jews into believing that maybe Jesus isn't the Messiah, so that they can, because they want the Antichrist to come through. What do you think?
Well, yeah, absolutely. We know that the entire satanic cult, which is the cabal, which is the deep state, we know they're Satanists. We know what they're doing. You look at all the pop stars and all the musicians and all of the shows that's coming out. Look what's going on with P. Daddy or Puff Daddy or whatever he's called now. All these people are being exposed as to what they're talking about. There's no question anymore. Is Satanism real inside the higher ups, the elites, as they call themselves? But it's also very, very prevalent in getting it to through the mainstream media and through the pop industry and cultural industry of the film industry. It's not so demonizing anymore. They're trying to normalize it. I mean, Amazon have released a cartoon show based on that. Lucifer wasn't as bad as they're telling you. You know, he was banned from heaven and there was a war and he was cast out and he's a bit pissed off about it. But we know that these people are Satanists. You can see it in the pop culture now with all of these stage shows that they put on during these concerts. And who are going to these concerts are kids, basically. They're the influential kids. And through television and media and other outlets where they're watching these videos, they're normalizing this string of events, you know, this satanic ritual and worship.
And I think the deep state, cabal, they're the ones that created the term Holocaust. And I think they committed the Holocaust to the Russian people. And then they tried to twist it. And the reason why now they've created this term anti-Semitic is so that nobody can talk about the deep state, really the deep state, because they're hiding behind them. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you mention the word Holocaust, you're walking into a storm, because everyone says, "Oh, you know, you can't talk about it. They killed 6 million Jews." It could well be true, Nick. I mean, I don't know enough about it. I mean, I've seen some things in Germany and traveling around. I've been in many of the camps, you know, and the footage from World War II that they showed them has been altered because, for example, there's a very famous black and white newsreel about when the US soldiers went into one particular camp. Let's say it was Dachau. And actually the people said, no, that was weeks later when they actually took the film footage. So what they did was When they liberated a camp, they didn't have the film crews with them. So they brought them back several weeks later and said, we got to film this. So they put a lot of the prisoners back in and recreated what they saw when they got in there, is what their official statement is. But we don't know exactly what it is, because most of these witnesses, the soldiers that were there now, are actually all dead. There's not many soldiers that were in World War II that's still alive. So could it have been fabricated? I don't think so. I think what happened really did happen, but who knows what the numbers really are. But you mentioned something about Russia. So, for example, in Russia during World War II, there was 27 million people killed during World War II, Russian citizens, including 8.7 military people, and there was 19 million civilians killed. But we're all focused on a particular group that were, attached to the Holocaust. There's millions and millions and millions and more people killed, but they all seem to take all the attention is on us.
So this is not my opinion. This is from data that I've seen, that I did a poll the other day on my Twitter. If you go to @Nick Veniamin, and I put a screenshot of this lady explaining how she's a very old lady, and she put a story how she doesn't remember the Holocaust. She doesn't believe it happened. And that Hitler, and then below her message, a lot of people were writing, people who were in Germany, who were alive that time, were saying that Hitler's done a lot of great things for the country. Mm-hmm. And remember, the winners tell the story. And the winners are the deep state. And they're telling us that Hitler was a terrible person. Now, I guarantee you that if the Rothschild family, the Zionists, won today and they defeated Trump, I guarantee you in 50 years from now, our children will be learning in history class that Trump was a dictator and he was just as bad as Hitler.
Well, exactly. But, World War II, here's the other straight, and we veered right off the path here, but it's a good one. Yeah. The Swiss bankers, they backed both countries. They backed Germany, gave Germany money, and they backed the Allies and gave them money. And there was another, a ton of strange events. Okay, why was Turkey never invaded by the Nazis? And I'll tell you why. It was for one reason, that Turkey did a deal with the German government at the time, saying, we will provide you with a special iron ore called chromium. So it's an ore called chromium. And out of that ore, you make really hard steel. So Germany says, look, if you keep giving us what we need for our war industry, which is being funded by the Swiss banks, which are also funding the Americans and the British and the French and whoever else is involved, we won't invade you. And Turkey said, okay, it's a good deal. We'll carry on doing business with you. Denmark, for example, were doing big deals behind closed doors to be friendly with Germany. And Germany, they took Denmark. Norway resisted. Even down to some of the British members of the government. We know fine well that there was very high-ranking members of the royal family at the time who were known Nazi sympathizers. But again, the truth has hushed up and it's changed because people don't want to know the truth. What they want to know is, okay, the Nazis were bad, we were good, and we won. But saying that the Holocaust didn't happen, I'm not going to go down that road. I don't have enough information. I have seen people that are talking about it. And did they invent it? I don't know. So I don't want to turn this interview into an anti-Holocaustic
listen, we're not saying we're anti anything. We're saying there's been a lot of reports from people who were around that time and they did not hear of any such activity happening. They heard that the economy for Germany was booming. They were forcing Hitler into a war, which he didn't want to do. And he had to protect his country because they wanted to take over. And he knew that these people were Zions. He knew about the Rothschild family and he wanted to get rid of them. But the deep state twisted it and said that he wanted to get rid of the Israelis. Now, I'm not saying that's true. I don't know, but these are reports that I've seen that I find very interesting, and I'm exercising my free speech.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. Excuse me. You're right. Who knows what the real truth is? I mean, I'll give you one example before we move on. Where I grew up in Ireland, there's a small fishing town, quite a famous place in Ireland, and off the coast, there lies the wreck of a very famous ship called the Lusitania. Now, I witnessed the story that I'm going to tell you, okay? Now, the ship left America, I think it was 1917, 1916, 1917, and it was full of ammunition and explosives that the Americans were donating to the British to help them fight World War I, okay? Now, the German High Command said, if we find out that the Americans are helping the British, we're going to take that as an act of war against us, and we're going to act upon it. So any civilian ship is at risk if you're carrying goods that are going to be helpful to the British to defeat us. That's fair enough. I don't think that's outrageous. So at the time of this incident, Nick, and I know about this because I've done 2 stories on it. I filmed the whole thing. Winston Churchill was head of the Admiralty. So Winston Churchill did a deal and he got a load of ammunition and explosives and he loaded it on the ship and he leaked the information to the German High Command. So the German High Command sent a U-boat looking for this ship because they know, right, we told you and now we know about it. So eventually the German U-boat caught up with the ship just off the coast, about 18 miles off the coast of where I'm from in Ireland. They sent 1 torpedo into it. The ship sank so quickly that 2,000 people couldn't get off the ship quick enough, and it sank. And it caused such a massive big deal that then England used all of this publicity, avenge the sinking of the Lusitania. Those cowardly Germans torpedoed a civilian vessel, and 2,500 people went to their graves. And they used that as a propaganda to get the Irish to join up in the British Army. And they sent all of the Irish troops as frontline fodder, funny enough, in Turkey mostly. So the English government took all the young men in Ireland, got them all rattled up, saying, you got to avenge the Lusitania. Your ancestors, your family members were killed. Now, let's fast forward to when I was a kid in the 1980s. Technology had moved on. The local fishermen knew where this wreck was, and they were using it to catch sole, a bottom fish, a flat fish. So it's called trawling, where you trawl the net across the bottom. And they were always bringing up debris, plates, portholes. Everybody had a trinket in their house from the Lusitania because the ship went down and everything inside it was spread out over quite a large area. It was 80 years later. So what happened was the technology was there, and there was a private exhibition. No, what's the word? An expedition. A private funded expedition was sending remote drones down there, and they saw that the explosion on the ship would be internally. So when if a torpedo goes into a ship, it would explode on this side and it would bend the metal to the inside of the ship. But what happened was it was such a gaping, huge hole that the metal, it had exploded from the inside and bent the metal out facing the ocean. So the news came out that an independent group had gone down and found evidence that this ship was carrying explosives when they said it never was. And the British government then launched a mini task force, right? And these are my school friends. These were their brothers. They were fishermen. And there was a massive hoo-ha because the British government came into Irish waters and said, right, no more fishing. We're excluding all of you guys. And they sent a whole marine team down there to hide the evidence that the ship was ever carrying explosives, because that incident forced America into the war. Churchill at the time, head of the Admiralty, and the British government would never have won the First World War if they were fighting alone, because they didn't have the arms, ammunition, or the money to do it. So they needed a false flag incident to get America to say, this is outrageous. We had American civilians on that ship and you sons of bitches have killed them. So, but the American government knew about it. And then they got the whole of the American public behind them. And then they joined World War I. And hundreds of thousands of men then died. There was shipping. I think there was 45,000 men died from the US because they got into war with Germany because it was a false flag. So we know that history can be manipulated, and these false flag events will cause this sort of snowball effect. And it's what these governments want. And this is exactly what the Rothschilds wanted. They wanted a war. And now World War II would never have happened, because at the end of World War I, the surrender terms were so severe for Germany. They had to pay back everything. They had to pay France back for all of the rebuilding of the entire country, all the bombings that were going on all around Europe, that you could have a wheelbarrow full of cash in Germany. And literally, you've got photographs of people going up to buy a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow full of cash because the inflation went through the roof. So when Hitler got into power, in the late 1920s and early 30s, he took Germany back. He says, okay, we're going to build autobahns, roads, so there's a work, so men can earn a living and afford to pay for the kids and put some bread on the table for the kids. So he did do a hell of a lot of good for the country, and then it just went nuts as he got more and more power crazy, which he did. You know, he shouldn't have been. He invaded Poland in September 1939, and then Operation Barbarossa, as he went into Russia, he got crazy for the land because he thought he was invincible. But the point we're making here is that there's always been a string of events that have been coordinated by governments to get the public behind them so they can go to war. And then all of the Rothschilds and all of the banking facilities and large houses can start all making millions. And we've seen it right through history.
Yeah, no, behind every government that wants to instigate a war, no matter the country, is because there is a Zionist Rothschild in there.
Yeah, and they're all in it for making money. If you look how many countries that America, like they're going after Iran now. Iran is the bad guy, launching missiles last week. I know you've done a lot of stories about that. But if you look, do you know how many countries Iran have invaded since, let's say, the 1920s? Zero. Zero. Yeah, America invaded, you know, in our recent history, we've got Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. You've got a string of countries even before that, Grenada, Panama, just to get Noriega out. You know, there's so many. Yeah, America, the regime that have run the USA, this deep state regime, we're all saying, oh, we're for democracy. It's not for democracy. It's just for their own financial benefits and to carry on an agenda. And like Libya is another one they invaded for no reason other than to get rid of Gaddafi because he was going to launch one currency and not do anything. The petrodollar is why the recent wars, the last 30 years, have been going on, maybe a bit more.
Interesting, very interesting. Let's move on to biblical predictions. What's your predictions going on?
Well, the other weird biblical prediction is I'm going to show you this. It's again, what is Israel really up to? I'm going to go into the weather one last. Now, this is a 16-minute video, but I'm not going to play you all the video. This is put together by Al Jazeera. Now, Al Jazeera, as you know, are an Arabic news channel, but they're banned now. I don't think you can get it in the UK, and I don't think you can get the English version in the USA either. So I'm going to show you a couple of minutes of this, Nick. Let's go in about 3 minutes, and then I'll send you the link, and you can put it on there. If people want to watch the rest of it. But just look at the investigational information into this, and you'll see where it's going to go.
We've conducted a forensic, meticulous examination of the events of October the 7th. We uncovered very real crimes committed by Hamas and others. But I think what was perhaps most significant were the crimes we discovered that did not happen. And it's hugely concerning that these revelations have been virtually entirely ignored by the Western press. What's extraordinary is the Israelis were aware of the plans. Hamas were actually training quite openly for this operation, and they were actually placing the training videos online so anyone could view them. On the very night of October the 7th, before dawn, spotters along the fence are reporting back to headquarters, and the head of Shin Bet and the head of military intelligence take this seriously enough that in the middle of the night, they're up and talking to each other, and they conclude it's just another training exercise. And what is extraordinary is that they don't even raise the alert level to number one, the most basic alert level would have made a huge difference. And they don't do that, which means that when Hamas bursts through the fence at 6:30 in the morning, they catch many of the defenders in their beds. I mean, you can see many of the soldiers are killed in their beds. Hamas had anticipated most of their fighters would be killed trying to get through the fence. In fact, only a small number were killed trying to get through the fence. They were as much taken by surprise as anyone by the performance of Israeli intelligence and the Israeli military. Crucially, also, they were taken by surprise by this very large music festival that was taking place, which they don't seem to have been aware of. Having overrun the military bases, the game plan was to grab hostages and take them back. And they do this on a large scale, but they also clearly kill very large numbers of unarmed civilians as well. The Israelis were then extraordinarily slow to respond. Now, they scramble Apache helicopters, but there's no ground control. It's pretty clear that in the chaos, some hostages at least were hit by Apache helicopter fire. We've identified 27 people who were clearly taken hostage, taken captive, and were taken away from their homes, but never made it to the fence, died somewhere between their homes and the fence. There's a fair chance that a number of them were killed by Apache helicopters. Within the kibbutzes, we've identified 18 people who were pretty much certainly killed by the police and the army as they arrived. 12 of them a specific incident in kibbutz Be'eri, where you have a large number of gunmen, around 40 gunmen, holed up in a house with 13 hostages. A tank is brought in and opens fire on the house. There are 2 survivors from this incident, which is why we know about it. There may be other incidents we don't know about because everyone was killed, but there are 2 survivors from this who spoke to Israeli media. There's a common sense thing. You just have to look at the scale of the destruction, and it's clear that 1,200 men armed with rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns did not do all of this. The Hannibal Directive, which was something that was developed in the 1980s by the Israelis, and it was basically to avoid situations where their enemies would capture 1 or 2 or 3 Israeli soldiers and then effectively hold them to ransom. There was one occasion where the Israelis released over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in return for a single Israeli soldier. So an order was issued whereby they said, it's better that we kill everyone than allow people to be captured. Now, this was supposedly rescinded several years ago, but at midday on October the 7th, the army revived the Hannibal Directive, put it into effect. 70 vehicles were hit. At least in some of the cases, everyone in the vehicle was killed.
The Israeli military does not deny the report.
The peculiarity of the days after October 7 is that the Israeli media and subsequently the international media choose to focus not on the very real and extensive crimes that Hamas and others did commit, but on crimes they did not commit. And this had 2 focuses. In the days immediately after, it's to do with babies. The most dramatic one is we see an allegation that there were 40 babies killed, many of them beheaded. This is very simple to deal with because we have a comprehensive list of the dead. We know that 2 babies are killed on October the 7th. One is an 10-month-old child who is hit by a bullet fired through a safe room door. The other is a child who dies after an emergency cesarean, a Bedouin child, in fact. Now, any story about babies that does not relate to those 2, and there are a lot of stories about babies, is not true. We know it's not true. This has enormous implications for the other wave of atrocity stories that began very quickly, which is to do with sexual violence, and particularly the Israeli assertion that it was widespread and systematic. To be clear, in the film, we are not saying that there were no rapes on October the 7th. We simply don't know. What we are saying is that there simply is not the evidence. There's not the forensic evidence, there's not the visual evidence, there's not the photographic evidence, and there is not the witness evidence to support the allegation of widespread and systematic rape. The Israelis have this strange system where they farm out the collection of bodies after disasters and terrorist attacks and so on to an organization called Zaka, who are ultra-Orthodox religious volunteers. They collect the bodies, prepare them for religious burial and so on. A character that many people will have seen in the days afterwards is Yossi Landau, who was the southern commander of Zaka, who was on television a great deal. He said,
the 2 piles of 10 children each were tied to the back, burned to death.
You then see a phone call which Netanyahu makes to President Biden, where he repeats this story. In fact, he embellishes it.
They took dozens of children, bound them up, burned them, and executed them.
Terribly important, this, because it was entirely untrue. We know the house he's talking about. He's talking about the house in kibbutz Be'eri, which was the house that was stormed by Israeli police and military, and where it is almost certain that all of the hostages were killed by the Israeli police and military. There were 2 children there, 2 twins, but no other children. So we know the story is untrue. Mr. Landau told a number of other stories. There's one particularly notorious one about the fetus being cut out of a pregnant woman.
The baby that was connected to the cord was stabbed, and she was shot in the back.
We simply know this is untrue. The list of the dead show there's no such victim. Mr. Landau said, I have a picture of this atrocity.
If you want to see the picture, I have the picture of it. This is the baby.
I'm sorry to be graphic here, but I can't see a baby here.
You can't see the baby but this is the picture of the mother.
It was a piece of charred flesh. It wasn't a baby. It certainly wasn't a baby. So it was interesting. And psychologically, I'm not quite sure why he offered to show me a photo that he didn't have.
Nick, the video goes on for another 8 minutes. And
Yeah, very interesting. So why do you think they're lying or trying to, they're trying to make claims that can't be backed up?
The report was very, very well put together. And the journalist, you can see, has got his morals right, the integrity of the guy. And he's saying, look, we're not one side or the other. It's because they want people to have this belief. They want to get people into the narrative of what they're doing. They want worldwide support that Israeli defended itself on this attack on October 7th, when they knew fine well what was coming. The security was lax. They were guilty of killing a lot of their own civilians because they just went gung-ho. I mean, that tank blowing up a whole house, there was 13 people in it. It's too much information to just not be true. It's all about getting the public into a place where they're anger and they're crying, they're thinking about burning babies and rapes going on. But when you get to the truth about what it is, that's not what the truth is at all. Israeli have played their cards to get the public and the world to follow what they want you to believe. But it hasn't worked because people have been talking about the truth here and it's not working. I don't know if Israel will ever rebuild the public profile because they're probably the most detested, hated country in the world now because most people understand that what they're doing is wrong. But what's the real story? There's lots of different theories. It's a land grab. They're trying to get a new canal built. They're trying to get all the Palestinians out because there's oil there. There's many, many stories, but I think basically they seem to be following some religious events because if they're trying to rebuild this temple, they need all that land cleared. They're following it, what's been talked about in the Bible. I think they're up to something of a religious nature. I mean, that story in New York where they were tunneling underneath the main place of worship as well for weeks and weeks. There was one guy said he actually rang the authorities and said, listen, I can hear guys tunneling and I can hear them speaking Hebrew. They're down there tunneling. And of course, nobody believed them. Yeah. So I don't know what the real agenda is, Nick, but
what do you think people that love God, who have a religion, who have the intention to build a temple because they believe the Messiah is going to come?
Yeah.
How can those same people that want to serve God are thinking it's correct to go into a land, kill loads of people to clear them out so they can have the Messiah come through? I mean, what God would want them to do that? I mean, I think it's the Rothschild family. They want the Antichrist to come. They're God, who is evil, and they're Zionists.
Exactly, mate. This is what I'm saying. They're Jewish. The philosophy, or the prophecy says that the Messiah will come, but it's not the real Messiah. Then he'll show himself as the Antichrist. But if you're following everything you have to do, you got to get a red cow. Then you've got to barbecue it. Then you got to take the ashes. Then you got to get these specially selected priests, and they need to cleanse themselves in the ashes. And then those priests can then remove the rest of the ashes to the location where this temple is going to be built. It's weird. Are they following it? Because we know that there's specific things laid out in the Bible, and we know that these satanic sons of bitches are all following it because there is an order to it. It's a ceremony. It's a ritual. It's totally bizarre what's going on. And if you take all these different pieces and put it together, it's like, okay, I can see that what's going on. Oh, there's the red cows. And now they're doing this. And then they're talking about building this temple in 3 months. But they're taking it from the Bible. They're not taking it from their own book of worship. They're taking it from a book of worship that they say is bullshit. So, how are you gonna figure it all out? You just got to let things play out a bit, Nick, really.
Yeah.
The last story.
You need to talk to a Rothschild to find out the facts.
Yeah. Sorry, Rothschild. I got a couple of questions for you. Yeah. Now, the last piece is a very short one, and it's about another part of the biblical predictions is about the deserts flooding. And so green areas become dry and deserts become green again. And what they're doing in Dubai at the moment is Dubai has this really weird weather system. It's what they do is they can make their own rain. So what they do is they send this electrical charge into the atmosphere and it creates clouds. But now what they're doing here is, this is Dubai a couple of days ago. Have a look at this. Dubai airport. Look how much rain is the river flowing through. Cloud seeding worse, trying to make it rain. It just got so out of hand. Tunnels are flooding. And this whole weather experiment has gone wrong, but there's a lot of that mentioned in the Bibles, that the desert will spring water. And there's a lot of videos online on that. Fish will swim across desert highways, roads. There's water coming up out of the desert. Rivers are being created from nothing. The planet's changing. And again, if you're a guy that follows all of this biblical stuff, it's all in there, which I think it's totally bizarre. Now, are they deliberately doing it? Are they manipulating the weather? Are they sending off seismic charges in the desert to try and convince us that what's been laid out in the Bible is coming? The book of Revelation, the end of days, the coming of the Antichrist. We're all in tribulation, There's only one part that doesn't seem to have come true, and that's when a lot of the good people get taken up. They just leave. Boom. All the bad people are left behind to live here in the 4 years, the 7 years of hell on earth, and all the good guys are taken up.
It might be more metaphorical, the taken up. It could mean that there might be a lot of people who are rising in consciousness, taken up in that.
I agree with that. I think that's more like it. This great awakening is because we're awakening to the lies and deceit that the governments have been spoon feeding us for how many generations, generation after generation. We're lying. We're awakening to this lies. We're not believing you anymore. We don't believe in your political system. We don't believe in the lies. We don't believe in the dollar anymore, But it's very, very, very interesting times we're living in. I'll send you the link to that 16-minute Al Jazeera investigation of what happened on October 7th. You can put it on the show for your viewers to witness themselves. And I think I would end my little jibber jabber today by saying, make your own decisions. Have a look at what's going around. If you believe the Bible, okay. But there's definitely something weird going on with what Israel are doing and these biblical predictions that they're following, because they're openly talking about it. And again, it goes over most people's heads because I haven't studied the Bible, but it's all from research. I find that's a bit weird. Let me have a look at that. Oh, that sounds odd. It's just my nature. I'm curious.
I think we want to know about it from a historical point of view and events in the world that's happening, so we know what's going on. But David, thank you very much for sharing everything with us today. It's been a great honor. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the viewers before we finish?
I don't know what's going on as much as you don't. All I can do is present a lot of strange things that it's making me question. But I think ultimately, do not believe anything that comes through that television. Do your own research. Have a look at it. Even the footage, a crazy one that's circulating now, is they had some CCTV footage of the missile that struck the Pentagon. There was never an airplane that blew up that. It was a missile. You can clearly see it on the CCTV. Don't believe anything that the government tells you because they're liars. They want you to be consistently living in fear, terrified of Muslims, terrified of terrorists, terrified of ISIS. Now we're going to be terrified of somebody else. They always want you in this constant state of fear. And if you just turn the television off, you have no clue what's going on. You just live your life in love. It's the easiest thing to do. Stop watching the television.
Absolutely. Well, David, thank you very much. And we'll speak again very soon. You take care and God bless.
Thank you, guys. My pleasure. Thanks, Nick.
Bye-bye.